Gents, welcome to the Unfair Fight. What is this? I'm losing track. Episode 4. I know we're recording lots. But X, I got a question for you. So I've seen this trend with beards in the hacking and cybersecurity world. And my question is, does the length equal experience and capability, or is like the deep V, because this is the first time in my life I've ever seen you in a button-down shirt, which one gets you more street cred?
That's true.
We need a poll.
Yeah, I'd say we need a poll on that one. That one's hard to judge out.
Heck yeah, dude.
Yeah, it all depends, on how deep the V is and how long the beard is.
That's true. It could
or
be
how styled it is too. There could be a lot of external variables in this.
The beard to V ratio.
The beard to V ratio.
A Silicon Valley episode. Remember that one? That was the best one ever. So, but we have a new guest and a new permanent guest too. This is obviously our kind of tech session of this podcast. We're gonna, talk about ransomware gangs and malware and all sorts of fun stuff. So, David Rushmer, welcome to the show and welcome to Blackpoint.
Yeah. Hey, well, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be here. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I apologize that I have a face for radio, but hopefully you'll have me on here a little bit more often.
I think we all have a face for radio. I have a voice for neither, so there you go. And so, for those that don't know, David is our new head of threat research for Blackpoint, and also the head of our new Adversary Pursuit Group, which is kind of like our skunkworks unit. So I know we're going to have a lot of cool detection techniques coming out of your unit and a lot of neat threat intel. And I think today what we wanted to talk about is really, there's been a lot of news with the unfortunate situation in Russia, a lot of talk to cyber attack, but also on the kind of criminal side, definitely some news on Conti, some leaks. And we want to kind of dig into some tactics and really get into it. But maybe before we do that, David, do you want to give a little bit of background, as much as you can share, of kind of, since you're kind of new to this show, how you got into tech, how your previous roles?
Yeah, sure. So I started out doing large-scale cyber analytics and basically building and maintaining a large-scale cyber defensive platform. Did that for quite a number of years. Absolutely loved it. Fancied a change. Went straight in on the defensive side of things. So we're talking reverse engineering, network forensics, anything I could get my hands on was what I was really looking forward to. So managed to do that, and I've been doing that for a number of years. You ask one question on leading a team, and before you know it, you've jumped from engineering through to people management. Which is obviously wonderful. I do enjoy interacting with everyone. It's so good, personally, to work with people that are passionate about security, whether or not you're on the red team, whether you're on the blue team. I think, and I'm being honest about this when I say this is the reason why I joined Blackpoint, is while the technology is awesome, everything you see with technology is fantastic. Every person that I've spoken to here is passionate about pushing and innovating. And moving forward. And that is the real reason why I'm here. I think that the people I've spoken to have inspired me and excited me so much about what you're trying to do. This is just the next step for me, right? Is getting more stuck in, getting more hands-on again, and hopefully bringing some of the experience I've built up over the last decade plus into this space, especially around threat groups and threat actors and malware forensics as a whole as well.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing, if you do what everyone else is doing, you're going to get the same result. And, we spent, 3+ years building out our tech before we ever came to market. And we just tried to flip it on its head. But I think so far it's proven to be diabolically effective so far. Nothing's ever perfect. But what was your role previous before you joined us?
So I was the director of threat research over at BlackBerry, which,
so Cylance, really, right?
Cylance back in the day. So I joined Cylance, second UK employee, way back when, 2016.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
I didn't know this.
Yeah. So second UK hire, and the first in what was a group called POC Threat Research, which was all about giving researchers into proof of concept environments. So spent a lot of time working with customers, finding things in their environments. And really just being as hands-on as possible for a large number of years, which was fantastic for me. You know,
Oh yeah.
I
You find a lot of wild stuff in POCs, as we know.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, I've seen some horror stories. I've seen some amazing things as well. I will say over the last 5 years, there has been a definite increase in people's focus on security. It's no longer just about, you know, buying a product and saying, well, we've got this. They actually start to care. And I think as long as we're teaching as well as providing technologies and inspiring everyone to think about security and be the heroes of their own organization, we're winning. Because right now we're fighting an uphill battle against people that we can't see, we don't know.
Yeah,
you know?
hence the name of the podcast, The Unfair Fight.
Exactly,
right? You know,
exactly.
We want to win that sucker. You know, David, you touched on something that was that I think spoke to me for a second. One thing I've told folks for a long time is I always felt like, you know, in cybersecurity, details matter. Yeah, do we need frameworks? Do we need a lens to look at things? But details matter, hands-on matters. And one of the things that always bugs me is sometimes when I look at a lot of the university training programs where you get a cybersecurity degree, and then we interview folks. So this is like a good lesson. Anyone looking to get into cybersecurity, going through and getting Kali and deploying Meterpreter and clicking the buttons doesn't mean you understand fundamentals. And one kind of, you know, universal trait of anyone that is elite in any domain is that a complete and utter mastery of the fundamentals. And I'd really love to see our cybersecurity industry be a lot more like a trade, right? Where you're kind of an apprentice, a journeyman, master, sort of defender or operator, and then really the same concept like a residency with a doctor. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because you really need the hands-on. And to be candid, before you even get into security, you better start in IT and networking. Because without those fundamentals, understanding protocols, domains, you know, just basic subnetting. I mean, how many people we interview, like, I don't even think could answer like a basic subnetting question.
It's almost the gating item these days. Like, how much do you, what is a Windows domain? Even though it's not relevant to set them up, you have to know it relevant to catching things. You can't catch things you don't know anything about, you know, especially all the tactics these days are pretty much systematic.
And X, like, give the audience a little bit of your background. I mean, you are epitomized hands-on. This is what you do. You know, and I don't know, give everyone a little background on yourself, because you're definitely a sniper in this game, you know, and popped out. And I went, oh my gosh, you know, when I worked at the NSA, I would have killed to have a guy with X's knowledge. We had some great folks, but I'm telling you, man, you would have been world-class in that world.
Yeah, I like to stay a little bit behind the scenes on certain things. You know, I like to let some other people take glory sometimes. But my background is, you know, I actually was really did a lot of networking. I was, you know, I really got into the IT industry, well, outside of like help desk and running, you know, and doing, you know, if anyone remembers in the US Circuit City, you know, I used to run their Geek Squad equivalent. So that's where I started out in doing computers. I really talking about from the ground up, right? And then really didn't
the CEO Marson over at Malwarebytes, he started in kind of, you know, fixing computers. I think that was the impetus to make he got tired of rebuilding systems and wanted to clean malware, and that's what started an epic company.
From his cleaning the malware, exactly.
Got a lot of respect for those guys, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to call that out. They're good.
So coming down from there, and then I really went into networking with kind of a big focus on critical infrastructure with Schneider Electric. I worked there for quite a bit of time. You know, building networks for, you know, BMS systems and commercial HVAC and for, you know, like, you know, camera systems, you know, and a lot of those, a lot of fiber networking. Batnet, Modbus, all those fun ones. So did a lot of networking around that type of things, and then kind of transgressed more towards the, you know, this, and I kind of made a break towards the software industry. I started working with Tenable, doing networking, and then, you know, back in the day, you know, I say back in the day, but not even like 10 years ago, there really wasn't security groups in corporate infrastructure. It was usually the networking guys that kind of installed the firewalls, managed the firewalls, installed the Gigamons, the inline stuff, the FireEyes, kind of did all the management on that. So that's kind of where I started cutting into that. And plus working at Tenable, you know, the vulnerability management company also helped out also. So I really started beefing up the technology there. And, you know, there's a lot of great peers I had over there. You know, and so my background is really a lot in, you know, administration and IT, but I've always had that knack for cybersecurity. type of stuff, and reverse engineering. Ever since I was a very young person with a Game Shark on my PlayStation, I was editing memory and hacking stuff. Kind of always been a little bit on anything, even if I didn't do it professionally for a while. It was always part of my blood to see something and be like, well, how does that work?
David X is like a covert software engineer, by the way. He'll never admit it, but I've actually watched and like, oh, you liar. You're such a liar. You just don't want to get stuck with any coding tests.
Right. That's one of those things. It's one of those things, I've taken a little bit more onto liking them. I didn't really like programming too much, but it's kind of a necessary when you get into this stuff. You got to know, I probably knew assembly better than I knew any object-oriented programming for a long time.
Really?
Just due to reversing and knowing that kind of stuff. And so, I kind of just tacked on and started liking it more, especially when programming, I never really took on to Python too much. It's all right, but I felt like it's kind of weak. But when things came out like Golang and all those, I started really liking those frameworks a lot more and kind of how they did things. And it's very close to C# or just C++. So,
I think when it comes to coding, right, it's different horses for different courses. So, the thing I love about Python is certainly from a red team perspective, any server that comes installed will always have Python on it. So all your industrial systems with Linux base installation has Python. So if you can gain access, it's like, oh, you've disabled all these tools, but I can just rewrite them in Python on the endpoint, and I can build a network scanner. I called it
the Max PowerShell.
Yeah, that's it.
The Max PowerShell. That's incredible. Aren't they porting PowerShell over to Mac? I thought
it is ported over. It's ported over.
How does it work? Have you played with it much?
I haven't played with it. Not at all. They ported over a lot. Even the .NET now. A lot of programming is all cross-platform these days. They've done a lot of that.
So before we get into all the Conti fun, David, so you ran a 40-person team over at Silence BlackBerry Silence? Yeah. What would you give? Because there's a lot of folks that are always trying to get into cybersecurity, and it's hard, right? Because you have to have domain knowledge to get in, but you want to get in and you don't have any experience. What would your advice to be? And you, X, same question to you. For someone new, let's say they're in college or right out of college, and they want to get into either red teaming or blue teaming. How do they get started?
So, from my personal experience, there's the first and foremost is internships are usually your best friend. If you're in college at the time and you get an opportunity to go and do an internship, I fully recommend it. But what I would say is make sure you pick and choose the company correctly, because there are ones out there that won't give you the challenging tasks. And then there will be the ones that expect you to be just as much a threat researcher or a red teamer as everyone else. They won't leave you to it, but they're investing in you as part of their future as an organization. But if you don't have that opportunity, there are so many great portals and ways of learning that are completely free. So first and foremost, there are always blogs out there. There are easy ways to learn that you can go ahead and mimic. There are some great YouTube tutorials all the time. There's a couple of people that I follow on LinkedIn who always come up with some great advice and little tips and tweaks that I didn't know. And then there are a whole bunch of fantastic books that include really good tutorials and pieces inside them. The best thing is, though, is everyone in this community is pretty active on Twitter and pretty active on other platforms. And if you've got a passion and a want to learn, reach out to people. If people in this industry are denying you help getting into this industry, you don't need them. They're not the type of people you want to be working with anyway. And if you can reach out to myself, I honestly don't mind. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter. Ask me any questions. I will answer as many as I can, because as you said, this is a really hard industry to break into. But once you're here, it's not that big, and we need it to grow. We
do. We have an epic shortage.
That's the thing. You need it to grow. I think too, even from my personal experience, I've interviewed thousands and thousands of people, and a majority of them just don't have the drive like that. I don't know what, if you want to get into it, make sure you really like it and you want to live and breathe it. Because it changes.
Isn't that good life advice, X?
Yeah, it's a good life advice.
Do the job you love that you do. Yeah. Remember, our head of platform, I love this guy, Death Bernard. He is absolutely the best cloud architect I've ever met. And, I remember I was thanking him because he was working on a really hard problem really late. And he was like, dude, I would do this for free. I love this. Yeah. This is what I do. This is my passion. I think that's a good piece of advice. Sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to
that's exactly
because you said something brilliant.
I could sniff out salary chasers in 2 seconds. when I interview them. And I can tell people that are really invested in this. And another thing too is, I do talk to, I interview people kind of, entry level, and they always talk about, well, I don't get to do this in my company. I don't get to do this in my company. You got to be very self-driven to get going with this stuff. I used to work at a, an NIH warehouse destroying hard drives. That was the whole job when I first moved out here to Maryland. And so, but the thing was, I was surrounded with servers, racks, networking equipment, all the stuff that was destined to be destroyed. So why not? So what I did is I started throwing some of it up into a rack, started installing Windows domains on random disk I would find leftover computers, and be like, hey, if I want to get out of this warehouse that had no AC, no heater, and go on, I got to learn some of this stuff. And I had all the equipment around me to do it. So I was like, started racking stuff, figuring things out, programming Cisco stuff, started doing all this. And it was enough to say that I knew it pretty well and kept my resume very short. Don't make a resume too long and concise. I was able to get, an interview, and I was able to talk the talk, of course, because I had known it all.
Hands-on on it all. And then, they, I wouldn't say they took a flyer on me because I didn't really have great backgrounds in it, but they're like, this guy knows Active Directory. You might not have it professionally, but he talks it.
I think that's the thing though. When you're in this environment, once you get through the door, even if it's open just a crack, you'll learn, you'll get hands-on, but you need that initial drive to pull that door open.
Exactly.
It's, as you said, right, you can sniff someone out in about 2 minutes who doesn't really care about it, who isn't really interested, because you start asking basic usability questions, not just about the tools, because anyone can Google those, but the intricacies and how they work and what their thoughts and opinions on them are. And if it's, I've not really used it and I don't have a chance to use it in my job. I've interviewed plenty of SOC analysts that want to get into malware research and dig in deeper. And the best way they've done it is they stick around an extra hour or two after work and will take on the same challenges the threat researchers are doing. They'll look at those pieces of malware and go, I can do exactly the same thing they're doing, and I can ask them questions because I know they're gonna answer.
That's huge. You know how I got into this? So I was like just an idiot, right? I was an athlete in college, and I just wanted to lift weights and play sports and do that stuff. But
the opposite career path of mine.
Yeah, I know, right? And I'm the youngest of four, and my older brother was like, "Hey, idiot! I know you're a marketing major and you don't really know what to do with your life, but here's 3 Cisco books." So this is like in 98, 99, and I was like, "Okay, I'll read that." And so I was teaching tennis in the summer, reading the books and learning about spanning tree and all this stuff that made no sense to me. But I kept learning that. I got a job at the University of Maryland Network Operations Center. You know what their first task to me was? It was definitely a new guy thing. Like, here's a backpack vacuum. I want you to go to all the dorms, all the buildings, or these ones we've set out that have these old school hubs, and you need to vacuum the dust out of the side of them. And then it went to 110 blocks. Remember those old things? Punching down.
Yeah, man.
And then, that
you always punch it down the wrong way and you scream.
Yeah. Then I had to go to dorms and trace wires and figure out networking issues. And the fraternities, I'll never forget this. The fraternities were on like the campus network. So I went to one. They had party the night before. And so the floor was like that sticky beer. It was just nasty, the place. And I had to climb over all this stuff. And I remember I put my hand down. I had my tool bag over my shoulder trying to find the wiring closet. And I felt all this wet, chunky, nasty, like in my hand. I was like, this is disgusting. And then I looked. It was barf. And I went, I got to get cleaned up. But that's where it started. But then that graduated into starting to configure switches and routers. That is what opened the door for me to get to the National Security Agency. Ultimately, it turned out to be hands-on, like fundamental knowledge of networking, broadcasts. Like most people don't know. They don't just get routed between other domains, right? But as a hacker, like, it teaches you how to figure out where you are in environment and where you're going. And it's not that easy. And it's something as a defender you can use against someone when they're trying to do targeted port scans and things like that, because now you know what phase of the breach they're kind of in. And that's a great time to target them. Yeah. So, maybe switching gears here to kind of like the main, kind of focus of today's episode. Russia is doing something horrific, right? We all know this. And I believe Conti, the ransomware gang, immediately pledged allegiance to the Russian war effort. And then it seemed either some didn't agree, or maybe they had some Ukrainian folks in that group. I don't really know the truth. And then promptly there's an epic leak, which just kind of, I think, pulled the cover off a whole operation. So you guys give us a little overview of Conti. Who are they? What do they do? A little history group, a little how they operate. If you know, David, I think you're pretty steeped in some of this stuff. So love to just educate the audience on this group and how these hacking syndicates work in general.
So the Conti software is actually run by a group called Wizard Spider that is referenced a lot in media. And actually, this year's MITRE testing was heavily focused on Wizard Spider. So they're based out of Russia, and they've been active since about 2016. They operate purely as ransomware as a service, and they've run other campaigns using things like TrickBot, Ryuk, Bazaar Loader, ones that have been around a little bit longer than Conti. But Conti is one of their newer ones that first appeared in about 2020. And what makes it a little bit different is it's really fast. It's really quick. It's really dangerous. And that's why
on which part? The encryption part?
Yeah, the encryption part. The encryption part is a lot quicker. Certainly quicker than some of the ones like Ryuk. But what we haven't seen with it just yet is things like the triple threat, which was referenced probably about a year ago, where we saw Emotet, TrickBot, and Ryuk all rolled into one. So right now, Conti is just its own entity. And what it is really is it's ransomware as a service. So we've not seen any indication that this Russian-based group is selling their software to other cyber criminals. They're operating solely as themselves and potentially in partnership with other criminal organizations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And how are these guys structured? Do you know how they pick their targets out? I feel like some groups are big game hunters, and they're like, I'm picking this company because I know they have deep pockets, and I'm going to go after them. And I think a lot of them are almost by like drive-by scans. They're like, hey, didn't patch this FortiGate or whatever, and was vulnerable to the old remote code execution technique. How do they operate? How do they? Do you understand how they handle bringing affiliates on? How do they get paid? How they launder their money? Like, do they operate more as like a business?
Absolutely.
Obviously we know these answers. I just think it's good for the audience to kind of.
They operate purely as a business, and it fits into Russian cybercrime MO. Everything that you see coming out of Russian criminal organizations and those pieces. And the reason I'm saying criminal organizations is because there is no definitive link right now between Russian state and Russian cybercrime groups. It's speculated. And some of the Conti releases implicate it and indicate that there might be a link, but no one has definitive proof. And that's really important.
What, David? Want to know something wild? Sure. The 3 months leading up to our election, our last one, we had a 2,000% increase in responses. That meant bad guy in the network. We had to take him out. After the day after, it went poof, and then it picked back up around December 27th. It was really interesting. I'm convinced at a minute, I don't know this because I don't have any proof either, but I'm convinced there's definitely at least some form of relationship or at least buying off access. I don't know if it goes farther, but to think that these guys get to operate where they're operating out of without those intel groups having, it's a perfect standoff. You can kind of deny it while making money at the same time.
You read the logs, they've got an office in St. Petersburg. They actively talk about it. They talk about paying their taxes. They talk about taking PTO, taking time off, the office cat. So they're 100.
They have an office cat?
They have an office cat. There's literally
the
references in there of
the Conti cat.
Conti cat. Oh my god.
Conti cat. It better get some 9 cat background music. That's all I can say.
They probably have a piano in the office just to make it.
Piano.
No, but there's a lot of talk in there about taking their time off, paying taxes. They talk about team structure in terms of different project managers and different groups and entities responsible for different components. And this is why they're so different from some of the, I'm going to say script kiddie ransomware pieces that you see out there. It's because they are hiring software engineers to develop code. They're hiring people that understand those core fundamentals that we've just been talking about to get into the defensive side. They're hiring people to do those kind of things.
Yeah. Right. They have like whole groups. I know even in the leaks, they're talking about people signing up for trials for AVs. They have, and shell companies they're using to run these trials so they could test their software.
Yeah. I mean, you can, if you're really savvy enough and you've got the access in things like VirusTotal, you can look for unique uploaders. VT does a really good job of obfuscating it, but you can time attacks with certain other pieces of information and see people actually using those platforms for active testing to see whether or not an AV vendor is going to detect their latest campaign. It's a lot harder to do. It's a big OSINT effort, but
right.
It shows a level of sophistication that's more than just copy and paste of same code over and over again. They're constantly
doing
a lot more
nation
R&D.
state. Yeah, they're professionalized a bit.
Yeah, they're quite a bit, especially if you read through some of those the chats. I mean, they have the same problems corporations do. To high turnover.
Yeah,
they run through a lot of the similar issues.
Yeah,
there's chats in there too about all the developers going to Crimea during the summer and all the operators. So now they're like,
"Are you kidding me?"
Yeah, for vacation. So they're like, "Now, do we get temps in? How do we keep this going on?" They run through real world issues like that.
They have staffing issues.
They have staffing issues,
everybody else.
Like everybody else.
Yeah, it comes back around to it, right? When you look at an actual nation state and some of the other cybercrime groups, like say North Korea, they attack on weekends. They attack whenever they want. When you look at Russian cybercrime groups, it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 Russian time. They're not, unless they're conducting an operation themselves where they're kicking off a phishing campaign that needs to look like it's been sent from someone in your office space or something like that. It's 9 to 5 to them. They are operating as a business, and it's really straightforward when you read those logs. When you're going through them and you see just some of the simple things like, put it in the calendar that you're going to be off on holiday, or where are you going? I'm going here. It's, that's really nice. Do you need us to do anything? Is there anyone that we like? Who do we send to while you're away? The same things that we all do when we go on holiday, right?
Yeah, it's incredible. Can you guys just describe ransomware as a service, just like its most basic fundamental definition? X, for folks that's kind of new to this topic, or
it's like, kind of like similar to software as a service. They have these things like Conti. A lot of the other groups too will just let you pretty much, the operators kind of just rent the whole toolkit,
interesting
to this, or get the software, and then they'll give you the front end. Just kind of honestly, like real software, they'll give you the front end, they'll give you the encryptors and all this stuff. Usually they save the decryptors back just in case they don't get their cut. So they're not that
that's smart.
Yeah,
smart.
They're not that dumb and all that stuff. So
gotta give them props on that. What about? I know some of them have like help desks as well, mostly for facilitation of Bitcoin payments, because I think a lot of the victims like mind explosion when they don't kind of understand how do I actually pay to get out of the jam if they're really back up against a wall.
Right. They have whole support departments based around just getting the stuff. You can, even in some of the leaks, we get to see a little bit more into it, but even with some of the leaks, we were able to see the negotiations, and they're like, hey, I'm not going to accept this payments, and it's very interesting.
X. I'm not going to name his name, but I know your little one's probably rocking out to the Red Hot Chili Peppers now, isn't he? It's either that or he's beating up his brother.
Yeah, he's probably beating up his brother. I'm trying to turn my gain down here. He's probably beating him up.
That's fantastic. It wouldn't be a post-COVID world without some kids at home. So it's all good. It's all good. That's fantastic. So I think one thing that happened, which I think it was done with good intentions to potentially harm, the Conti group, was release of all their source code. Now, obviously, as defenders, our biggest concern is, all right, now the toolkit is out in mass and is going to be modified like crazy for evasion, and that release probably just enabled a lot of other groups. Not that they didn't have their own toolkits, but what do you guys think about that? And am I full of it? Do you think it harms them, hurts them?
It's an interesting one, right? Because you've effectively given away their proprietary software. If someone did it to Blackpoint and was able to reuse the code, you're like, well, have we lost a competitive advantage from a defensive capability? So it's the same for them. If everyone's doing the same things as them, and able to just put it onto the distribution services that you can hire on the dark web, well, then they're not doing anything new. They're not going to make as much money. They're not going to do all the things they need to do as a business. So it's twofold, really. That does damage them, but at the same time, you're dealing with the fact that that code is now out there. And we saw a similar thing with Zeus back in the day. When Zeus was released, everyone suddenly started incorporating components into their malware and into their cybercrime activities. I think what we'll end up doing, though, is the security community as a whole has moved on massively since then, and we're a lot more proactive in terms of taking those pieces of information and using them to help build defensive capabilities. So as long as we're doing what we need to do and taking that information and using it to make our products better, make the security community as a whole stronger, then it won't be as damaging as it is. If we just sit on it and go, wow, they released the source code and isn't that interesting, and do nothing with it, then, yes, it's going to be more dangerous, but that's our fault as professionals for not doing what we should be doing.
That's fair. My biggest, you make some really good points. My biggest fear is more, it's so easy. Take Cobalt Strike, for example. Like it's a running joke every time we see a breach. Try Cobalt Strike. It's to the point where I recognize the hash of it. I mean, so my question is, because it's always easy to or Mimikatz. I'm getting that guy's tweaking that every week to evade everything. And I just worry about you got a great kit and now you just modify it a bit it's kind of like taking an old F-16 platform, just giving it new electronic warfare kits as upgrades. An old platform stays viable, for a long time. I guess that's my biggest fear. But one kind of thing that comes out of that is what is a common Conti leak? What does a breach look like? Walk us through, A to Z on some of these breaches. I mean, X, I know you know this inside and out.
Every day, right?
Every day. Yeah. So what does it look like step by step? Because I think a lot of our world is so, in our security world, it's sexy to talk about malware. It's sexy to talk about remote code execution techniques and persistence techniques. But, my experience is that's part of it for sure. But there's a huge part of it which has nothing to do with malware.
Not at all, especially when it comes down to initial access, going down to how they got a lot of this initial access, to what David was saying. Well, they ran a lot of TrickBot and Bizarre Loader and things like that, Emotet, and things that were really good at email spam campaigns as ways to get into these hooks. And then they were like, okay, well, pass this to the Conti group, I'll pass this off to that. And so
they're kind of initial access brokers.
They're like initial access brokers, and a lot of the other ones, they have to, usually pay for the access, or they'll, have to try to breach in through vulnerabilities. It's kind of the hard way, right? Try to find open RDPs and all that, the really spray and pray kind of stuff. Well, they had a lot more valuable insight into these computers or these networks, because they were able to see from, TrickBot, oh, this is, X, Y, and Z corp.inc domain. This is a high value target. Let's get onto the Conti group. And then when they got in there, usually that's when the whole, recon phase starts here. This is where, hey, well, I'm on a machine. What do I do? How do I find my targets? And they all used, I would say common across almost a lot of these groups, they all use similar playbooks that consist of regular admin tools that actually our MSP community run all the time. So it's kind of a finicky thing. Like, hey, was this you that ran this program? And I'm talking about programs like NetScan, SoftPerfect Next Scanner, Angry AP Scanner, Advanced Port Scanner. All these are very common tools that we see they use, but they use them religiously to scan the networks and find other machines and find what's in the networks, so they can start moving on to spreading. They'll use Mimikatz a lot to dump local credentials. And this is where a lot of companies we've seen get in trouble, because they'll dump the local admin credentials using that. And so, and I would say a lot of times these are very shared local admin credentials across the network. That's kind of how
they kind of almost are like baby domain credentials. And, honestly, I think that is when you saw NotPetya years ago came out, right? It was a worm that combined a lot of tradecraft. It was password stealing, live off the land spreading, and then it had some exploits bundled with it. I don't think the exploits were really the reason that it spread so fast. I think a lot of times it would land on a machine. There's a service running as a local admin that was running on thousands of computers. Right. Now that local admin account can log in across all of these. And I think that was, single-handedly that kind of poor local admin IT hygiene is what enabled some worms to rip at an epic pace.
Absolutely.
And that was taken. I know one company, they lost 44,000 computers in about like 8-9 minutes.
Yeah.
In that one. And I'm almost positive it had nothing to do with the SMB exploits that were mixed with it. Because, on certain machines, those exploits, we obviously played around with them when they were out, but like they blue screen the machine like 50% of the time in XP.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Not super reliable. The most reliable way is using shared credentials across platforms.
You mean like being the IT guy?
Yeah, being the IT guy. And we see that time and time again. And they rip out fast. And all this is happening, and there's no antivirus alerts. No antivirus is going to be like, oh, that was bad net scan. It wasn't that net scan that your IT guy ran. It just doesn't happen like that. And even EDRs these days, they're not super tuned for this type of stuff. Yeah. So these are the early breach activities that gets missed very commonly. And you don't hear about it much because going back forensically, it's not the easiest thing to do. A lot of the times they don't even know where patient zero is. Yeah. And so how could they even go back to that? And then from here on is where they start using things like Cobalt Strike. Once they get the creds and they know they can spread, that's when they start ripping Cobalt Strike out. That's when they start ripping out AnyDesk, Screen Connect, Atera. That's when they start ripping out these backdoors that they can use, especially if Cobalt Strike gets caught. They immediately start going towards AnyDesk. And Atera.
Yeah, they'll use like legitimate applications, which are absolutely whitelisted in all the automated endpoint tools. I mean, I think that's another interesting thing. I actually need to, sometimes the AV and EDR community, I think, has done a great job, but it's just caused tradecraft to shift, right? They got really good at catching malware. They got really good, at catching persistence techniques. And then the bad guys are like, okay, well, I'm just going to use legit IT tools that are essentially like an RMM. And what we're seeing a lot these days is free trials of an RMM platform.
Very much
so. Used as their backdoor and C2 infrastructure.
We caught one once that was using 2 trials.
What was it? Talk to us about that one we caught the other week. I know this was...
it was across 2 different...
Talk about that one.
It was across...
David, I don't know if we told you about this one.
Yeah, this is new to me.
You'll dig this one.
It was across 2 different...
It
was across 2 different clients, 2 different MSPs, same tool set. So it was the same threat actor. Of course, we catch it so early, it's hard for me to tell who the threat actor was because there's really not much to it. But we caught them using a Avast as an RMM. Did not know that.
I think that's probably OEM'd.
It's probably
Isn't it level
OEM'd.
Something or other.
Yeah, I can't remember. It's like they call it like premium remote or something like that. So they're using that, and they're using that as their initial hook to deploy a trial of Screen Connect. And that was their way to do it. And they're starting to rip it out and spread it around. They're trying to spread the Screen Connect around, with patient zero having the
what tool did they use to spread it?
They used a tool that we have not seen used before by a ransomware group. It was called Total Software Inventory. Or Total Software Deployment also. So
how'd that one work under the hood? Was it like PS exec or?
It's very similar to like those angry IP scanners. Those scanners, they'll scan out, but what the difference between this one is they have the network inventory scanner, IP scanner. They also have the deployment tool. So once those scan results are done, you can just like right click and click deploy. It's kind of like
give it creds.
Yeah, and you use the local creds. You give it creds that you've ripped off from the machine. Most of the time, the users are local admins across, which is the case in this one. So
so lesson learned.
Yeah, lesson learned.
Audit
Don't make it easy for them.
Admin accounts that is many times overlooked. Yes. Like it's not whoever shows up in the net command for domain admins that burns you.
Yeah, and guess what? All your AD logs for weird stuff happening, you don't really see grade AD logs for local accounts. So keep that in mind, everybody. But anyway, I digress on that. But still, we saw them do that. We never seen the threat actor. And it was almost the same exact time across 2 different dispersed clients, 2 different verticals too. So they're shifting their tactics because this is post the leak of all these tools. They're like, all these tools are getting burnt. People are starting to realize, and I've been kind of preaching about these net scans and IP scanner and all this stuff that's out there that they use religiously. So now they're starting to move on, and it's going to be, they'll keep moving on. There's another one that they, it's just the tools that they like to use and all the trials and they're using. And they actually, came back again. So, we got the Screen Connect trial shut down, and they were, and then they tried to come back again on another device and try to deploy another trial. It's like, come on. They're like, I don't know, maybe that didn't work this time. But it
I
kind of
guess one
shows
lesson learned, like for our community, vendors specifically, in the MSP space specifically, because if you don't have an RMM platform, it's pretty hard to be a managed IT service provider. It's a cost of doing business. You need it, right? But I think the vendors would be wise to really tighten up the process to get access to a free trial. I think that is really, really, and I'm not naming names here. Everyone's trying to keep the lights on, make a living, and do what they
it's
do.
Not an
but
easy thing.
But there has to be some more of a gate in front of a free trial of an agent that gives you essentially God mode on the endpoint that's legitimate and is not going to get popped by any AVs or EDRs.
Right.
I think that's one pragmatic step that candidly won't really hurt the sales process, because the one thing that really hurts sales is when hackers are using your own product to ransomware your potential customers. That's problematic, I would say. So hopefully that's an easy business call, but I encourage every RMM vendor out there and remote access vendor to put some serious gates in front of their free trial process. No Gmails, no Yahoo accounts can sign up for this. Like, got to be that won't fix it all, but you got to be really smart about it.
Right. You'll keep out, it'll keep out a lot of the Windows shoppers, maybe more unsophisticated ones too. You're never gonna keep out the super ones, but there's gonna be a risk, and you just don't want everybody, because once someone figures it out, they all hop on the bandwagon. We've seen that too, so with when these playbooks get leaked, all the other groups will take the playbook, be like, okay, I'll start incorporating these into ours.
Right.
And then, you start getting super playbooks going on for around this stuff.
Right.
So that's what they like to do, to spread out. And then, from there, it's all about harvesting data. And this is usually spread amongst different functions within the groups too. Like there's the initial access, there's the lateral spread groups, and then there's, the actual deployers of the ransomware. So this doesn't, there's groups like Conti that have sped that process, because they're like a corporation, and
they kind of do it all.
They can do it really quick. It used to be a little bit longer soak times on these, because they were so busy. Maybe the deployers are so busy that the initial access people will come in, poke around, get the access, and then it'd be 2-3 weeks. But not as much anymore. They're getting way more efficient.
X, you touched on something huge, right, David? I'd love to know your thoughts on this. This is what I've seen. The marketing material from so many security companies are like, do you know the average hackers in your network like 90, 180 days before you ever detect them?
Yeah.
In our experience, like we do this 24/7, we save companies every single day. They don't want to hang out that long to ransom you. Maybe a nation state that wants to steal data and your IP, or steal credit cards, and it takes them a long time, or they want to keep it going. But a ransomware group, they want to be in and out as fast as possible, moving on to the next victim.
Get that money.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what we've seen.
It depends on what your business model is, right? Not just from the malware perspective, but what your business vertical is. So, for example, is it more beneficial to me if I've gone on to an accountancy firm to wait for you to make your payments, you plug the card machine in, you're making $100,000, $1 million transactions on behalf of businesses? Is it more beneficial to me to scam as much information from you as possible over a long period of time and save my ransomware as the final, coup d'etat on my way out the door?
That's a good point.
And that would be the same with a lot of different things. Is if they're playing the long game, they're doing it to gain that initial foothold. So, for example, if you're a company that is a redistributor of other people's software, why would I let you know that I'm in your system by ransoming it? I'm going to look at every way I can possibly compromise your supply chain.
That's full
to then
supply
deploy
chain,
even further. And so it comes down to those kind of pieces. It's a cost exercise on their behalf of, do we keep things going, or do we ransom it off? But what you'll tend to find is that 180 days is usually outside of the ransomware as a service groups and outside of the ransomware groups. It's on average, as you said, nation state, but also some of those ones where they'll leave a backdoor on there to come back in and have a look at a later date. Maybe they'll try and they're building up their scope and their access to ransomware all at the same time and overload the security community. Instead of doing it one at a time and giving us awareness that they're doing something, they save for that active campaign. So
That's some great nuance, David. I think, sometimes maybe my view is, we definitely do large enterprise. It's probably 20% of what we do. But really, our whole focus is on the MSP, managed IT service provider community. And I think like when you start looking up market where there's huge volumes of data to steal or payment information to siphon off, those can be long ones. Or if you have some sort of critical technology that nation states are going after, or they just want to do espionage, those would be long burns. I would say, one thing we've learned and piece of advice for the MSP community is your typical customer set is a smash and grab volume game for these bad guys. So your defenses, sadly, actually have to be, when you look at capacity and amount of damage that can be done in a single breach, your defenses have to be all focused on being hyper fast in your response, hyper fast detection, hyper fast response. And it stinks because you're serving really SMB, the small, medium business style community, which means to be really fast and really good at responses, it's a different kind of tech stack and setup. This isn't something where you can play the long game trolling through terabytes of logs. I mean, the whole log-based detection kind of regime we found to be almost entirely ineffective at line rate response operations. And it's not to throw shade on Seams and those sort of products because they do serve a really good purpose, especially on log retention for compliance and post-breach. But in the heat of the battle, we find them to be quite slow. That's an interesting nuance. So probably up market, longer dwell time. Down market, maybe not so much.
But I would say with the smaller businesses and to MSPs, don't be afraid to be aggressive in your responses. Right? If you go into it with an attitude of, well, it might be or it might not be, by that point, as you said, you're too late. You've got to be quicker. So distrust everything. Think evil. Think it's bad nonstop, because it's better to ultimately be wrong and have to allow something to happen and face that with a customer than for them to be compromised.
One thing I'd love to see, because when you think about like an RMM platform, they're awesome for IT for running a network, especially in our modern way where we have, on-prem, cloud infrastructure, and then remote workers, right? The boundaries are all like loosey-goosey now. But the problem is when they're taken over, they're the best legitimate backdoor in the world that can do whatever they want to the machine. We're seeing cases now where it's like RMM tool, BitLocker. There's your ransom. Guess what? Was there any malware in that? Zero. Or, you break into a network and we're seeing things where they'll cut and paste files into an encrypted zip directory that immediately nullifies. I mean, I know our whole new anti-ransom capability that's kind of like rolling out at the moment, is good against all that stuff. But it's a real interesting, shift in tactics, as folks are looking for kind of, high volume of opens and crypto API calls, in the Microsoft ecosystem. I think this is something we're going to watch big picture is as companies continue to get better in defensive technology, continue to get better at catching malware, unless you're going to watch the bad guys, and they have been moving more and more live off the land. That was always my preferred way of doing it because it's a lot more universal and applicable, and it's harder to be caught.
Yep. Let's not forget about, with the current Okta issues and all those people, and there's chatter going on how they're paying current employees for their VPN access. For the insider threats and all these stuffs too. Yeah, so.
X, you just touched on a topic. I know we weren't going to talk about this. This probably should be a whole nother episode.
Probably should be the insider.
One thing that I find that is just really slept on, and this is more for very targeted attacks, not ones where you didn't patch your firewall. Like if I were to write my resume, like put my network engineer hat on, I'd be listing all the types of gear I work on, right? And that would go on LinkedIn or wherever. It is incredibly important, especially if you're upmarket and larger companies. One, you need a policy for what your IT professionals write about in professional social media network, because this is exactly where you go to find out, this is a Sonic wall shop or whatever the firewall is. Because when you can go into, as the bad guy, into your victim's environment and know a lot more about what they're running, it crafts your game plan to not step on some tripwires or things that will get you caught. That's one thing. The second thing I've noticed, job postings. when you post jobs for security professionals and you list out all the tools they need to be experts on, you've literally just told the world what you're running. Like, imagine the military being like, yeah, I got these 10 capabilities at our forward operating base. They would never tell anyone. It's insane, right? So I think that's an area that is, it's free to tamp down that kind of open source, kind of attack surface.
Well, there's another really interesting point there as well. Is obviously when you're putting those job postings out, a lot of places list how much you're about to pay someone. Now, it's a difficult situation, right? Because you want to tell people how much you're going to pay them, and it's good to know. You want them interested in those pay packets. But if I'm thinking as an attacker, I'm going to turn around and go, you're massively underpaying them, and I can just pay them double to compromise your system. So they're going to get a job with you. They're going to come in with my USB stick or my software and plug it in because they're about to make double their salary.
Or just open the PDF you sent them.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Or just double click any disk.
Yeah. Oh no, it was an accident. They're not at fault. They accidentally opened an email or they opened a PDF and they've got a little payment from it. So,
that's huge. I tell you, that is definitely more advice upmarket when you're going to have like a focused team, whether it's nation state or criminal group going after like a large enterprise. I mean, I tell you, I always love to say, like, when you look at a target, you want to break them down to kind of 3 bins. Like, and this is more an upmarket, so this isn't as applicable to kind of small, medium business, because I think most of those attacks are drive-bys, not like I've researched this victim to the nth degree and I'm going to get some. I always love to break a target down into 3 bins. Those that create the information I'm looking to steal, assuming that's my operational goal. Those that control the infrastructure, where that information sits. This is the IT team. So this is where you start on LinkedIn. You're making a social network. All right, here's your Windows domain team. Here's your network engineering team. When you start making that kind of deck of cards or social network, and those that have a reason to communicate with the outside world, those are your social engineering victims. That's what you should think of, right? So that's, your finance department, your marketing. My favorite one is really, you target a sales. One thing it's tough, right? Businesses want customers to say, this company's great. We love them. We use them. Or they do a big deal for some new thing. They have a press release. The problem is when you start highlighting who your customers are, what you're doing is now giving a great seed to craft a request for quote, social engineering kind of phishing or spear phishing, really exercise, where I can pretend to be an existing customer of yours and I send it to the sales rep and I'm looking to give them more business. They're all going to open it. They're all going to open it. And you can trick any human once in something. That's another, it should be a law in my mind, in offensive cyber operations. And so, that's something to always think about, if you're up market is, you got to balance the marketing gain with the kind of social engineering risk you might be creating.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a real tricky space. You got to tread that balance. But I think, a couple takeaways is really just genericize your job opening, like your public facing stuff a little bit, especially when you're dealing with your security infrastructure or your IT jobs, right? Because when you start ripping off all the tools let's say you're not hiring a security person, you're hiring, a Windows domain administrator, and you start ripping off all the other tools you want them to be experienced with, or listing them, not ripping them off, listing them. You're just arming the adversary with knowledge going in. Yeah. And I think that gets incredibly important, sort of upmarket on this one. So maybe kind of switching gears. Where do you see the focus? Obviously, traditional Windows domain environments, are really the chief enabler of a lot of ransomware attacks. Where do you see some of this stuff going? I mean, we're getting into hybrid environments. You got Azure in the cloud. We can execute PowerShell from the cloud, and also the whole name of the game is SaaS, cloud first, which is great until the cloud's compromised. Where do you see kind of threat research and hacking sort of going? It's a hot topic for insurers, by the way.
It's a tricky one, right? So containerization is a big one. So you've obviously got virtualization and containers. I think the argument right now is containers are probably better because they share the kernel with the hardware itself. And there's risk to it, but the idea is that with a virtualized environment or a containerized environment, you can burn that asset. If you know it's compromised, you can just drop it. But they come with pros and cons. Like running those kind of environments and doing those kind of things, it comes at a cost against doing the physical. But I mean, it comes down to your needs as a business. If you don't need to do the big expensive, putting everything in the cloud and running everything there, don't do it. You can still have a safe, secure environment when you're doing a physical device, in your office. What I would say is that the big question for anyone in that situation is to ask yourself, why would you be attacked? What is it about you that is basically, someone would want? Is it they're after your money? Are they after your intellectual property? And base your solution around the level of protection your organization needs. Don't just buy into the most expensive solution and assume that you're going to get what you need. Personally. So, I mean, I think security as a whole and threat research as a whole will see a lot more in the realms of container work, less virtualization, because virtual environments are actually a lot easier to compromise and a lot easier to identify than people would
think. Especially on the hypervisor side.
Yeah. I mean, you can do some.
Everyone sleeps on the damn hypervisor. Shit's left open. It drives me nuts when I see some of these VMware servers where you can, you got to debate the default password sitting there.
Well, absolutely, and it's really, there are easy ways of identifying if you're in a virtual environment, right? There's computational tasking that you can't do, and we've seen malware historically, especially around some banking ones, that would identify they're in a virtual environment and then just overload those devices and crash the virtual machine just as a means of, tell you off for wasting their time in their mind, right?
Right.
But with containers, it's a little bit better. There's better ways of doing it. So I think we'll see a move more towards containerized environments, certainly in enterprise level environments, maybe not so much in SMBs.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, kind of underscore this point here. I was just on a call. We have obviously a whole compliance, kind of push within our own company, and specifically GDPR. Right. We want to make sure we do everything right by that wild and crazy framework. And what one of the recommendations was? We need to use a third-party product that's going to plug into our CRM and all sorts of hypersensitive platforms, so that when a request comes in, we can search the person identifiable information, smoke it all out of all that stuff. And my immediate response is, are you effing crazy? I'm going to now take a single third-party company and I'm going to give them access via API to all of our sensitive platforms for the once in a while, kind of request that comes in to remove my personal information. How is that not balanced from a GDPR perspective with oh, great, all our eggs are in the basket of this third-party company we have no control over? This is where compliance, and idealism is kind of sometimes running headlong into actual security and actual privacy. And I really worry sometimes. I kind of big picture, my view is the compliance industry is fantastic for creating some corporate awareness and responsibility for structured processes and professionalizing your operation. But so much of these frameworks I read are all looking post-breach. They're all not specific. This is why I love CIS, the Center for Internet Security, their controls and benchmarks. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm a huge fan. Why? Because these guys actually took the time to have domain knowledge and say, you should configure this, in your Microsoft 365 environment the following ways, because that's how real security gets done. And I was just appalled at some of the recommendations, that we see to be compliant. You're actually teeing up for a much larger data breach. And I'm not going to name the company, but there's a company that specializes purely in hooking all these platforms to get rid of, your basically personally identifiable information. Well, great. Now that thing has God mode on how many companies?
Now they become the PII.
Yeah. I mean, GDPR, I think is a great idea in principle, but it's one of those ones where someone said, hey, let's do this, and then didn't really think it through. I'm all for it. I'm an advocate of a level of anonymization in where my data is, but that's the important thing, right? Is you don't need a third-party organization if you're doing the correct things with the data. If you anonymize it to the point where you can't actually identify it, so you can use it for marketing data to work out your verticals and your age ranges and things like that, but you can't work out the individually named people, that's fine. And I mean, I agree with things like there's a level of accountability now in organizations having to say when there's been a breach. Interestingly, though, if you read the wording, if the data is anonymized enough, they don't actually have to say anything about the breach because technically your personally identifiable information wasn't actually stolen.
There, right? It's all good.
Yeah, that's it. But I mean, I think I'm very distrustful of anything that says I need to give single level access to one particular organization to everything. I'm like, well, you've literally just said that's the organization we need to attack. If we can work
go
our
hack
way on
this one.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to call it an industry right now. Of course, you got to make this a little controversial.
Yeah, of course.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be real, right?
Yeah,
we call it like we see it, straight up. Let me caveat: we're probably wrong sometimes, but the code review companies, source code review from on a investment, on an acquisition. It's an audit where you send your source code to a third party company, basically to be looked for, like, are you packaging open source tools you shouldn't be? You know, what libraries are you running that have some CVE associated with them? But you upload all your source code to these companies. And I think there was a pretty big breach of one of them, but like that would be, if I was a hacker, universally kind of the biggest place I would focus. I mean, you want to cause epic pain. I mean, it's just nuts. These and the way some of these companies, from firsthand experience I've seen, like ask you to transfer the code and secure it is utterly shocking.
Yeah, and that's what comes. It's another good point too, Johnny. Always question your vendors, because I've questioned the vendors before, and they're like, "Oh, okay, maybe this time we'll use a single encryption key, not a shared encryption key." So, okay, you should have been doing that all along. But always question your vendors, on certain processes and stuff too.
Well, that was one, right?
Keep them honest.
Yeah, we learned that some of these guys will they'll use a shared key across multiple customers for the source code encryption. Crazy.
I'm out.
Crazy.
I'm done.
Like, I'm out. Yeah, I'll make an exception for you. I know.
That was our answer too. No thank you. Is that Taylor Swift? No, whose song is that? Thanks, no thanks. I don't know. Oh no, Ariana Grande. Thank you.
I thought you were going to go with thanks for playing.
There we go. Yeah, exactly. The that whole, there's a lot of industries where you put a lot of eggs in a basket. And I think that's a good security takeaway. You really want some diversity, and you really got to slice things off. So you might lose your arm, but you don't lose the body, right? I think that's another good defensive posture, because the reality is, it's 2022. How many companies out there could operate if their entire IT infrastructure was wrecked? There's very few. So it's literally like your crown jewels.
Yeah.
It's a wild space. I think, a couple things that came out of here. We were talking about kind of third-party vendors, and I want to do some other episodes future. I'm going to preview them. We're going to do one on physical security tools. Basically badge swipes, and in all your security camera stuff. And we have some great contacts. We're going to bring on some pros from the space. I really want to walk through kind of how these platforms, especially when you're dealing with, like, I would say more critical infrastructure, utilities, ports. Oh my gosh, we're going to do a section on physical security and ports. That's a really, really big one. One thing that always makes me a little bit nervous. I don't think the United States, and I could be wrong, so I hope someone on the internet corrects me if I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong on this. I'm not sure the United States dominates the kind of container picking and moving crane environment. And these platforms are highly, highly automated. They have PLCs, they have cameras, and most people put them on the same damn domain as their corporate environment. I'm pretty sure most of these are made in China now. Yeah.
I mean,
we want to talk about.
There's some easy ways of checking. I mean, Shodan is one of those companies that's always scanning the internet, right? You know what you're looking for. You just have to go in there and do a search and find out. Like it's
or all you got to do, like kind of when the Russians hit that Ukraine power grid a bunch of years ago, it was a whole corporate Windows domain breach that they were able to then find folks where they could VPN over into the OT network, and there was actually no protocol. It wasn't like they're mucking with set points, in a PLC platform or anything like that. But it was the same applies for kind of port infrastructure. So that's an area I think kind of folks need to really pay attention if you're in that space. So we'll do one on for sure on kind of that intersection of physical security and IT security, because a lot of times these platforms are recommended by vendor to be hooked up to your Windows domain. So if you fire someone, guess what? You delete the domain account, they don't have badge swipe access anymore. But boy, that's a house of cards when your domain gets ransomed, I can assure you. So yeah. Guys, what else? What else do we want to chat about? I mean, I think we've covered a lot on sort of Conti. Where do you think Conti goes next?
Man, I just checked their website. They're still ripping out.
So, are they?
Yeah,
there's a bunch of victims up there.
There's still a bunch of victims. So I don't know. I don't think they're definitely going anywhere soon.
No, I think criminal organizations will keep doing what they're doing. I mean, the Russian state situation and their partnerships with things like Iran, that's a completely different topic of conversation. And that's why I mentioned at the start, right? There's no definitive link between the two. So you can trust that criminals are going to keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And nothing's really going to stop them, as much as they say they're there to support Russian state and they will attack people. If it's going to hit their bottom line, they probably won't, right? Because they're in it for the money.
And I think in the way that the Russian government operates a bit, I don't think those guys get to operate freely without some kickbacks going to someone else. So there's a financial tie there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's touched upon in those documents, right? They reference people that they have to pay who are their bosses, as much as they're the heads of those groups and heads of Wizard Spider. They still got bosses they need to pay. Now, they don't say who those bosses are. They're just referred to as the boss. But, you can speculate.
Yeah. You don't have to be too naive to know how
exactly
organized crime works.
Yeah.
Let's be honest here. Yeah. The X takeaways. You're a business, you're an MSP, you're a large enterprise. There's a lot of kind of fear. I know the president released and essentially a warning to kind of shields up, because obviously this war is not invasion. Let's call it what it is not going to plan, and that's a dangerous situation when you have a ideological enemy whose back is up against a wall. Both from cyber's one lever of power. I obviously worry a lot more about chem bio nuke. That makes cyber seem paltry in comparison. But what are your recommendations? You want to leave the audience and IT professionals with a couple kind of pieces of advice?
Yeah, practice least privilege always. Make sure that the accounts only have access to what they need to. Find your external risk. Always scan, because a lot of these ransomware groups will come right in from that open RDP. For that's on the internet. Make sure you got all the vulnerabilities for anything external. Also has been checked. Your FortiGates, your Citrix, your Exchange. These are and
this is not to throw shade on those companies. We want to be really clear. Like, every software product in the world, in my opinion, will have vulnerabilities if you look hard enough. It's more about being smart and identifying them when they exist, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's not to have those, but to actually make sure that you understand what you have out there and is it patched or not. Right. That's what it's based around. I mean, it really comes down to all that, and then make sure you're finding what your client's main risk is, and doing just some quick tests on it. If you have a main client that has their biggest risk is a database somewhere, make sure that you have controls in place that if someone does get in and starts expelling the database, you can detect that.
Right.
You can kind of keep it targeted. You don't got to go to these full scale penetration tests that cost $10K. And so, sometimes you don't really go that deep into it. You just need to find what's the crown jewels for my client and how I need to protect them. And am I following best practices? And that will reduce your risk enormously.
Right. Can I call out one industry that I think really needs to tighten up their game? Correctional institutions. Seeing way too many correctional institutions connected to the internet where you see all the PLCs right behind the firewall. That is an area I highly recommend. Here's a good rule of thumb. When you have PLCs, don't connect that network to the internet. How about that? That one might be good advice. That's one area that I'm obviously, if all the doors open, everyone's going to know, shit's going completely sideways, but it's reckless from what I've been seeing in the industry at this point. So, David, anything else you'd like to kind of add in? Any kind of feedback, advice? I know we've covered a lot today, but that's the point of this. We really want to be educational and separate kind of the BS marketing stuff from the real deal in security.
I mean, from me, it would purely be a case of think evil. Think the worst case scenario when
but assume a breach.
Yeah, assume it, right? If you see something you don't trust, don't go, it might be okay. Just assume it's bad. And don't be afraid to call out someone for doing something stupid. That's it.
Right.
It could be the CEO of the organization. It could be your own boss. But security is an everyone responsibility. It is down to you to be the hero of your company. It is down to you to be the hero who stops things from happening and ends up saving healthcare organizations inadvertently by passing on the right information. Don't be afraid to voice your concerns. And any company that squashes that is not the company you should be working for.
That's fair. Great advice. Gents, thank you so much. That was a blast. I know we have tons of new episodes. You'll probably see 2 or 3 of these a month. And along with all of our other episodes, we have a great one that's kind of coming out soon. We're going to be covering kind of 3 main topics in this podcast, kind of the intersection of national security, geopolitics, and cyber, right? Because they're all kind of intertwined at this point. We're also going to cover traits of overachievers, high performance organizations, how to run a great business, really. And then third, we're going to jump down to the nuts and bolts in security like we did today. So, gents, I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time today. And till next time. See ya.
Thanks a lot.
See ya.